All right, today we are tackling one of the most important and, honestly, one of the bloodiest moments in all of history, the French Revolution. We're going to explore this incredible story of how a powerful dream of liberty and equality, well, how it spiraled into the nightmare of the Reign of Terror. And you'll see how the aftershocks of this thing are still shaping our world today. Let's dive in.
So let's jump right into the middle of the chaos. Picture this. It's the morning of July 14th, 1789. The entire city of Paris is basically a giant powder keg waiting for a spark. You've got rumors flying everywhere that the king is about to send in his troops to crush the city. And that fear, it's turning into something else, something much more dangerous. It's turning into pure rage, and it is just about to explode.
And then it happens. A crowd, thousands of ordinary people, marches on the Bastille. Now you have to understand, the Bastille wasn't just some old prison. Oh no, it was this massive, terrifying symbol of the king's absolute power. So when they went for it, they weren't just looking for gunpowder to arm themselves. They were making a statement. They were literally trying to tear down the walls of oppression.
The storming of the Bastille, that was the spark. But like I said, the powder keg had been filling up for decades. So that brings us to the big question, right? How did a revolution that started with these beautiful ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, end up with the guillotine in the town square? Well, to figure that out, we've got to rewind and look at the broken, deeply unfair society that was just waiting to explode.
Okay, so before all the chaos of 1789, French society, which historians call the Old Regime, was basically a house of cards, a system just teetering on the brink of total collapse, held together by nothing more than tradition, privilege, and just staggering inequality.
You know, you almost have to feel a little sorry for King Louis XVI. When he gets the throne in 1774, he's only 20 years old, and he inherits a total mess. The royal bank account is, well, it's empty, completely tapped out. Why? Years of ridiculously expensive wars. They even helped fund the American Revolution, ironically, plus the insane cost of just keeping the lights on at the Palace of Versailles. The country was flat broke. But the problem was so much deeper than just an empty wallet. It was baked right into the very structure of French society. See, France was split into three groups, or estates, and when you look at the numbers, it's just shocking. You've got 98% of the people on one side, and a tiny 2% on the other, holding all the wealth and all the power. I mean, how could a system like that possibly last?
All right, so let's get into what these three estates actually were. Because this system, this was the bedrock of the whole old regime. If you want to understand the rage that fueled this revolution, you have to understand this.
Okay, check this out. This lays it all out, and it's just wild. You've got the first estate, that's the clergy. The second estate, the nobles. And together, they're a tiny fraction of the population, but they enjoyed all the perks just because of who their parents were. And the biggest perk of all? They paid pretty much zero taxes. So guess who paid for everything? Yep, the third estate. All 27 million of them. They shouldered the entire burden.
There was this popular saying back then that just perfectly captures the feeling. It's so vivid. The nobleman is the spider, the peasant the fly. And that's exactly how the Third Estate felt. Like they were completely trapped in a web, just having the life slowly drained out of them by the rich and powerful. It wasn't a society. It was a system of exploitation, plain and simple.
And as if all that wasn't bad enough, the weather turns against them. You get a string of bad harvests, and suddenly, people are literally starving in the streets. The price of bread, I mean, the one thing everyone needed to survive, just skyrocketed. So while the poor are riding for a crust of bread, where's the royal family? Oh, they're just chilling in their unbelievably lavish palace at Versailles, completely disconnected from reality.
So with the country going broke and people starving, King Louis is backed into a corner. He makes a huge, fateful decision. He does something that hasn't been done in 175 years. He calls a meeting of the Estates General, which was the closest thing France had to a real parliament. And you know what? The whole thing blew up over one simple issue: voting. The old system was totally rigged. Each estate got one vote, which meant the clergy and the nobles could always team up and vote down the third estate, 2-1, every single time. The third estate said, no way, we want a fair system, one vote per person. And when the king said no, that was it. They knew they'd never get a fair shot, so they just walked out. And this is where things start moving really, really fast. After walking out, the Third Estate basically says, fine, we are the real government now. They call themselves the National Assembly. They find a nearby indoor tennis court, of all places, and they all take this dramatic oath, the tennis court oath, swearing they won't leave until they've written a whole new constitution for France. It was this incredible act of defiance, and it lit the fuse that led right to the Bastille just a few weeks later.
Then, that August, the National Assembly puts out one of the most important documents, maybe ever, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. And this thing was a bombshell. It said that rights like liberty and equality aren't things a king gives you. They're yours just because you're human. They belong to you from the moment you're born. I mean, this was the sound of a whole new world being born. But that beautiful dream of a peaceful, modern France, it didn't last long. Things took a very dark turn. The revolution got more and more radical, paranoia started to creep in everywhere, and pretty soon the streets of Paris began to run red with blood.
The real point of no return was probably in 1791. The king and his family, they try to escape France in disguise, but they get caught right near the border. And that act, it just shattered any tiny bit of trust that was left. In the eyes of the people, he wasn't their king anymore. He was a traitor. And from there, it was a fast track to disaster for him. The monarchy is abolished, France is declared a republic, and the man who was King Louis XVI is put on trial, not as a king, but as citizen Louis Capet. The verdict? Guilty. The sentence? Death.
And this right here, this is where you see the soul of the revolution just split right into. On one hand, you have guys like Camille Desmoulins saying, hey, liberty is about happiness and reason and justice. But on the other hand, you have the radical leader, Maximilien Robespierre, making this really chilling argument. He says that to protect the revolution from its enemies, terror isn't just an option, it is absolutely necessary. It's justice.
And believe me, that terror was horrifyingly real. Just look at that number, 40,000. That's the estimated number of people who were executed in just about 1 year, during what we now call the Reign of Terror. This wasn't chaos, this was official government policy. Fear was the law of the land. At the head of it all was Robespierre and his Committee of Public Safety. They had absolute power. Spies were everywhere. Just whispering something against the government or even just complaining that bread was too expensive, that could get you a one-way ticket to the guillotine. But in the end, the revolution started to eat its own children. Robespierre himself, the architect of the terror, was arrested and sent to face what they called the National Razor. And with his death, the terror was finally over.
So, after all that bloodshed, all that chaos, what was left? The revolution had devoured its own, for sure, but it had also changed the world forever. Let's talk about what it left behind.
Well, in the short term, it wasn't a stable democracy, that's for sure. The chaos led to this weak, corrupt government called the Directory, which basically created a huge power vacuum. And into that vacuum stepped a brilliant, super ambitious, and wildly popular young general. You've probably heard of him, Napoleon Bonaparte. He was ready to take charge.
So here's the big takeaway, the lasting impact. Despite the terror, despite the fact that it ended with a dictator, the French Revolution was absolutely not a failure. It completely smashed the old system of kings and nobles. And more importantly, it unleashed these world-changing ideas. Liberty, equality, fraternity. The idea that people have the right to rule themselves. Those ideas caught fire, and they would inspire revolutions all across the globe for the next 2 centuries. And that really brings us to the central, haunting question of the whole revolution, doesn't it? It gave us the language we still use today for human rights and democracy, but it came at the cost of unimaginable terror and ended in a dictatorship. Which leaves us with this really tough question, one that people are still grappling with today. What is the true price of liberty?